before too long that you'll need, effectively a nuclear power scale.
And if you are a coder, you're probably a loser.
There's no reason why you can have, our first billion-dollar no-person company, or you have multiple companies that are doing this.
Someone switches off the AI, we don't have any food.
Yeah.
Ken, you're a genuine AI pioneer. It's fascinating. You've had a fascinating career. You've got a company now called BenevolentAI, which is also very exciting. I'm an investor myself, so I'm generally putting my money where my mouth is. But I've got lots of questions to ask you about the industry, the AI industry, and where technology is going.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted to be here. Let's dig right in.
Ken, I read a quote of yours where you said the UK is at risk of losing its sovereignty because of AI. What do you mean by that?
So what I mean is the things that you need to protect within your nation. So it could be your water sovereignty, your energy sovereignty, things that become core. There's a risk that the more we consume cognitive systems from the US or from China or possibly from Europe, we lose some of our inherent ability to have our systems thinking on their own.
So you're saying, the way we're going, AI will become as important to food in terms of security for a country. And if we don't have our own sort of AI infrastructure, we're at big risk.
Yeah. And when I think of it for humans, the thinking piece of it is the piece that we recognize the most. We're thinking beings. This is what separates us from other species. And if we're in a position where the industries that we rely on, are they themselves relying on cognitive systems from the United States or from China?
So if someone switches off the AI, we don't have any food.
Yeah. Yeah, or we don't have any jobs.
So what's the risk? Is that the risk is that we're dealing with US companies who have most of this. Obviously, China will have some as well, but we're dealing with US companies. In the UK is dealing with US companies who have this.
Yeah, I think that the issue is do you own your own cognitive layer as a nation, right? And if you look at France and Europe generally, they are investing in it, but they also have a power infrastructure that can accommodate it. There's a lot of nuclear power that sits in France. The frontier labs that tend to be kind of grouped around those. Here, it's one of the problems is actually the grid. It's not like we can't put a power plant somewhere, but how do we transport that power around our nation? And these things are massive amounts of power needed to train these models, more than sending it off to AWS.
Well, it's funny. I was reading this morning that even the big companies, big American companies, are struggling to get the infrastructure.
Yeah.
They're behind the schedule on getting infrastructure to power
100%.
Things like ChatGPT.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
So
a massive amount of investment. You see these. Right, these mind-boggling numbers that are going into these centers, and you think, but it could be, before too long that you'll need, effectively a nuclear power scale to power the centers to train the models.
Well, the trouble is, the electricity cost is a problem for even just factories in the UK. It's got one of the most expensive electricity costs in the world. So even for factories doing anything here, it's expensive. But is it as simple as that? It's basically the power cost?
That's a big piece of it. And the other piece of it is probably around, what the government decides it wants to focus on. I've been advocating for having cognitive sovereignty in the UK. I think it's necessary. As industries become more and more reliant on AI, and you see that all the time. If you as a nation become reliant on cognitive capabilities and somebody else controls, it's like having nuclear weapons but being unable to use them in a way.
You always talked about that a couple of, even 2 or 3 years ago, slightly dismissive of the ability of AI because it was basically just a language predictor. It's predicting the next word. That was sort of the conversation we
LLMs,
had 3 or 4 years ago.
Yep.
And now it's literally, I coded. I've never built a website in my life, and I did one that I needed to do with Claude Coworker and did it literally in 2 hours. And my son, who designs websites, looked at it and he was so depressed. He's like, "What?" Like it literally. So it's no longer, the change in even the perceptions of AI. Everyone knows ChatGPT now. I think 2 years ago, if you mentioned to someone walking down the street, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. Maybe you can expand on where people think AI is and where AI really is.
So the Stanford HAI report was recently released, and that report is looking at, in many respects, the divergence between what experts are thinking is happening in the AI world and what the public think is happening in the AI world, but also metrics around the impact that AI is having, in terms of jobs and how that translates. And anyway, that was published just yesterday. So my gist of the report is that AI experts are much more bullish of the positive impact that AI is going to have or is having compared to the general the general populace. They looked at things like productivity in the workplace, whereas the experts think that, we're going to be moving towards this radical abundance with this making an impact. And the general populace are probably thinking, what's going to happen to my job? The areas that
so they agree on the likely outcome that this is going to increase productivity and reduce jobs.
Yeah, I think
so. There's an agreement on that.
Yes, it's the framing. One is
a loser and one is a winner. So if you own a company and you employ coders, you're a winner, and if you are a coder, you're probably a loser. but I've also seen this argument in the New York Times, which was, I think you and I talked about it once, but I've seen this article in the New York Times where they were saying, okay, so coders at the big companies will be losing jobs. They'll be shedding jobs. The big companies will be losing coding jobs, but the small companies, let's say from 20 to 100 people type companies, before it didn't make sense for them to have a tech person because they were doing something else. But suddenly now they can have a tech person, and because that tech person can design websites, can write code, can do all sorts of things, design apps because of AI now, one tech person is what 5 people would have done 20 years ago. So it makes sense now so their coders will get jobs at the 20 to 100 people size companies.
Yep. Only the top 5% of companies that are employing AI are receiving any benefit from it, an economic benefit from it. So these tend to be the very biggest of the companies. So the argument breaks down.
Oh, so you're saying the productivity benefit for bigger companies is more impactful than for smaller companies?
Yes, that's what.
But surely it's coming. A company with 20 people, who had to pay for a website. But we used to pay 10 grand to get a freaking logo. Right? I mean, who would do that now? You're just like, give me 10 and I'll take one.
Yes.
And now you used to pay 20 grand to get a website. And now, so I,
yes.
and
the people who
I want
who
you
made
to
the logo.
that. I want you to simplify that for us ordinary people out there. Simplify why it's not being felt in productivity.
So this is a good segue. In a way, this is empowering the micro, right? Rather than empowering the medium-sized business. So if you look at this report, and I haven't gone through their references. I was just kind of glancing at it this morning as I was going through, and that was one of the main themes, which is you see a return on investment far higher in an actually very small percentage. Now, if you're comparing a return on investment, which is massive, compared to I was going to spend $10,000 on a website. Now I'm not going to spend any thousand on a website. The impact is so disproportionate. So the economic benefit, right? Which is an economic benefit. AI tools, the way that their consumer focus of the vibe coding, the ability to generate a website, you've got emerging agentic coordination systems like Codex and Claude have one as well, where they're able to coordinate different layers of agents that do things on your behalf. They're not great, right? They're not bad,
But they,
but they're not great.
but they're massively great compared to what they were 18 months ago.
100%.
You know, so you know, if we go forward 18, so maybe there is it maybe there's no productivity gain yet, and there's always a sort of a transition era.
Yep.
You know, but maybe 18 months time we're going to see this massive productivity boom.
Yeah.
Unemployment, but maybe a productivity boom for those who do have jobs.
I generally don't think that you're going to see widespread adoption at the enterprise level enough in 18 months' time, right? These things need to be planned, right? You know, so if any advice I have to enterprise businesses is, it's not just I'm going to grab some AI off the shelf and do this. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has to be done to your underlying plumbing in order to make utility of these things, right? And that investment has to be made. So you're seeing the return on investment in these large companies, because 3 years ago they started devoting resource to this. So if you imagine that, they're the ones that are kind of reaping, you know, I'm 5% better, I'm 6% more efficient, right? That is beginning to widen a gap on it. And the mid-size enterprises are going to, they need to start investing that.
Well, is that because, you know, we're all sort of learning how to use, say, Coworker, you know, Anthropic, Claude, you know, we're all sort of learning to use it. Is that because those medium-sized companies, you know, the boss, you know, hasn't really had time to think about it. He haven't had time to go. But maybe in a year or two, they'll be going, we want a Claude expert. You know, there'll be actually, who knows how to use this Coworker better than anyone else, you know, or who knows how to use Coworker. We're going to hire someone like that. We're going to stick them in the corner, and they'll give us 5 things that, you know, we want our website done, we want a purchasing system done, we want this made more efficient, we want a hire and fire system, we want all that kind of stuff, and they sit there in the corner. But that's a year or two away, but eventually someone sitting with some sort of Anthropic product will be able to sit, and maybe the experts haven't been defined. Can you hire those people?
Yeah.
You know, those sort of things. Maybe the smaller companies aren't realizing yet. You know, maybe not ready yet.
Yep.
To hire those people.
Maybe
not.
What I'm seeing is that, well, there's kind of different schools for this. There's the we don't know where this is going, let's not do anything and see where it goes. There's the everything's getting faster and cheaper and better, let's just wait a little bit longer and it'll be faster, cheaper, and better. There's the, well, we can't do this right now because we don't have this infrastructure in place. Soon there'll be a blank, which magically makes our system in place so that we can benefit from it. And then on the other side, there's people who say, I'm investing in this, or, you know, this was 3 years ago, I'm investing in that. And that's where we're seeing the divergence, right? So again, looking at that report where you say that, you know, the top 5% of businesses are beginning to diverge, right? It's because they began to invest in this at a time. So you just, you know, it will happen for companies, right? It's undeniable. I think the interesting thing though around productivity, because you're mentioning Claude and ChatGPT, these are chat functions, right? And there's a whole underlying different types of technologies that OpenAI and Anthropic are trying to move into enterprise that have varying degrees of utility for their enterprise customers, but it's getting better. And then you have this other end of empowering individuals that otherwise wouldn't have these tools at all. Like, so for instance, your ability to make
Websites.
a website is something that you probably wouldn't have had, you know, a year ago. So there's more and more intelligence going into how to support a business. I won't be the first one to say this, but it's entirely possible in fairly short order that we'll have our first kind of one-person billion-dollar company. And if you take that to the next level, right, there's no reason why you can have, our first $1 billion no person company, or you have multiple companies that are doing this. And I think that's something that really isn't spoken about. Right?
So what you're talking about is I'm using co-worker as an example all the time, but what you're talking about is I say to an AI, listen, I want a company that's going to design a new type of broom. And I want a company that's going to design a new type of umbrella. You go away and design a type of umbrella which is better than the existing type of umbrellas out there. Find a way to produce it. Find materials. Find a way to produce it. Then create a website. Then link it up with Shopify or something, and then find a way to market it. And then here's your budget. They can't print money yet, but here's I'll give you £5,000, and you go off and you try and sell that. You link it up to Amazon, and you design the product. You design the logo. You source the materials. You get it made. You link it up with China or wherever you're going to get it made, and you link it up with Spotify, and just let me know how my return on investment is going. How far away are we from that?
So this has been tested probably over the last year with some really good success. Not $1 billion companies, but really good success.
Well, we'll take $100,000.
Here's a really funny story. This was written up in Wired probably 6, 8, 10 months ago. I can't remember. And it was a guy who he was writing. Yeah, it's a funny article, but true story. He was at lunch, and he happened to be eating a grilled cheese sandwich. Doesn't matter, but he received a phone call from his chief technology officer. His name was Roy. I can't remember what his last name is. And Roy said, I got a message from Megan, who's in marketing. She said that you wanted to get an update on the numbers. And he said, well, I'm a little confused by that. And Roy was like, well, do you not want to hear the numbers? He said, yeah, I do want to hear the numbers. But I'm confused. And it kind of transpired that Roy wasn't sure if Megan asked him and was reaching out, or maybe Roy spoke to Megan. Right. So there's a little bit of confusion, and Roy acknowledged that there was a little bit of confusion on there. Here's the rub. Roy doesn't exist. Okay. He is an AI agent. And Megan doesn't exist either, right?
So, but they have voices.
Yeah, you do from 11 Labs. Yeah, and they're having a conversation about stuff where the person, the only human in the company, isn't aware of what's happening, and I think that is hilarious. And right, so you can see that some of these things have moved beyond the imaginative companies. To things that are practical. The thing that I think has moved the needle, to really move the needle to a big company, right? From kind of, I'm selling umbrellas and I'm making a margin, to something that is really going to move the needle, and I'm going to sell it for $1 billion or 10 billion or whatever it is the idea itself. So in your scenario, you said, give me an umbrella, make an improvement in an umbrella, right? And the things that inspire me from entrepreneurs are when they're pitching something and I'm like, I've never heard of that. That's super interesting. So the ability for a generative model, like a large language model, a next word predictor, as I've called it for many years, to come up with that spark of innovation. This is in the purview of humans at the moment.
So machines can make, the computer software can make, but we still have imagination benefit.
Yes.
But how much, like using my umbrella example again, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to say, make a better umbrella. And the minute I've thought of that, I'm going to say, make a better phone case, or make a better chessboard, and go and do that, So it's not that much imagination, but what is stopping?
What I'm saying is that isn't imagination, right? You're not going to get a patent on that, right?
No, but without if I said chessboards, go and have a look at all the chessboards out there, have a look at the margin, have a look at, a very efficient way here of making wooden chessboards, and go and see where you could source them and send an email and get a quote. And then, if that looks reasonable, and check the market for what the average chessboards are sold for, make sure it's okay. Or look at 100 products, maybe not even chessboards. You look at 100 products, find where there's a gap between production cost and selling price, and get an account on Amazon and start selling. I mean, we can't be that far away.
I think that
are we far away? I know there's no brains behind it. It's a simple idea, but are we that far away? I want to pin you down. What do you think? 1 year, 2 year, 5 years?
Already happening. Right. That's already happening.
It's already happening. So, you started BenevolentAI, which for transparency, I was an investor in from the beginning, which went to over $1 billion. Now come back down again. But it was the first company in the world, first company in history to develop a drug by software.
Yep, by AI. Yep.
An approved, FDA-approved pharmaceutical drug. What occurred to you to start mixing AI with pharmaceutical development?
So, in the very traditional approach that this biotech took, it was entirely inefficient. So you had human capacity constraints. A human can, like one of the most prolific blue sky scientists, the very top of the food chain, would read up to 400 scientific publications per year, which is just a fraction of the number of scientific publications that are produced.
So no human being can keep up with the amount of medical data coming out every day.
That's right. And then equally, you can have teams of people, but there's no collective consciousness between that. So even if you were to divvy that out, there isn't a collective consciousness. There isn't digital recollection.
So I can read something, you can read something, but we can't keep up to date with each other's reading.
Right. And I had already been invested in deep technologies, so recurrent neural networks, and could see the utility of deep tech being used in R&D.
So you saw the need because you had
I saw the inefficiently.
Yeah, you had a pharmaceutical company. You saw how inefficient it was, and just at that time, the very early beginnings of AI were starting to emerge.
Yeah.
And you combined them. I can't remember when you set up BenevolentAI.
That was 2012.
So it was very early, and it went to £1 billion valuation.
2 billion, yeah.
And developed 2 billion. Yeah. Billion here, billion there. But it developed the first FDA-approved drug.
So to the extent it's still the only FDA.
So you're the only company, BenevolentAI, which you run, is the only company to have achieved an FDA-approved drug.
That's correct. Yeah.
But now it's
kind of irrespective. It's not Google. It's not Pfizer.
Yes.
It's a small UK company.
But you've now pivoted away from pharmaceutical development itself. Now you're doing more enterprise information provision. Is that the right way of doing it? Right way of expressing it?
Yeah. It's around decision support. For leadership, so they're making decisions.
You're now helping pharmaceutical companies rather than trying to be a pharmaceutical company.
That's correct.
So you're selling the shovels rather than digging the hole yourself.
Digging the hole. Yeah. Well, that's a bad expression. But yeah, no. So that's right. So with decision support and giving executives more understanding, right? Just like a scientist before would say, okay, well, I didn't know that this pathway existed because I wasn't reading that journal, or I didn't have access to this proteomic database, but now I have the insights from it. The same thing is for an executive. There are things that are happening in the market around their asset, that they need to be aware of, and it's very hard to keep track of those signals all the time. So it's not just the science; it's also how they're being positioned, what their safety is.
So if I was to simplify that, I'm running a pharmaceutical company, or I'm involved in a pharmaceutical company developing a drug, and I need to know not just how my own drug is going through the different clinical trials. I also need to know what competitors are doing, particularly what competitors are doing. Is that?
Yeah. What competitors are doing. How you should be negotiating
the sort of market prices of pharmaceuticals.
Yep, that's right.
And that sort of information is almost impossible. I mean, for the layman, it might sound quite trivial to keep up to date with that. But what you're saying is it's very, very difficult for any person or CEO or a company to keep track of what's happening in the marketplace.
Yep.
And this is almost like, call it a newsletter or an update or a monitor of market conditions.
Yeah,
around
your asset,
which you then provide to those pharmaceutical companies, or sell that information to pharmaceutical companies.
So it's the way that it's been described. It's like having McKinsey sit in your office, and they're constantly advising you around what's changed and how you should react to it. And some of those may be positive changes, some of those may be negative changes, some of it may be stability. But rather than something being project-based, I mean, I speak for Benevolent consumed an awful lot of consultancy services over its time. We'd bring in McKinsey and LEK, and they would say, based on all this, you should be doing this. I have that all the time.
And it's very expensive, isn't it? Like data, these sort of legacy companies, older companies providing information, where information is almost becoming
ubiquitous.
And analysing that information. It used to be a real, you'd pay £50,000 for an annual subscription to get information about something. But aren't those days slowly disappearing? Processing information is now within the bounds.
You may remember from the early Benevolent days, the JAX, the Judgment Augmented Cognition system that we had. So this is not a data problem. Everybody has data, right? And I've spoken about data, and I've been to some extent dismissive of data moats that companies think provides the edge for them. It's not a tool analysis perspective either. There's lots of tools that analyze the vast amounts of data. Sometimes they sit on top of the data itself. I think that the judgment of how you should be affecting decisions is the piece that is possible today where it probably wasn't possible 5 years ago.
So it's one thing, to simplify, oversimplify. It's one thing to have a spreadsheet, have all that data and go, great, I've got the data. And even if you see sort of trends in that data, you're saying there's another level. It's decision making, decision suggestions, what you should do in this scenario, or what this another drug has just been approved or passed phase 2 or something.
Yep.
Therefore, you should can your drug or speed it up or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
It's making a decision. It's recommending a decision. It's going. It's almost doing the whole thing for you.
Yes. Yeah. So what it's saying is, this is what's happened. This is how it affects you, and this is what you should do about it. If anything.
So it can't get much easier than that. But I was going to ask you, it's with this development of AI, it's almost like social media. Like social media. Like I've got this podcast. Social media. Anyone can start a podcast. Anyone can go on Instagram. Anyone. It's within reach for anyone to have a voice out there. So anyone can do it. But so it's a lot easier to get in. But on the other hand, there's no barrier to entry. But what's become more important now is brand recognition. So, if Brad Pitt starts up his Instagram account, someone like that will immediately have a lot of followers, because it's no longer the ability just to create the product, get the information out there. It's the brand name that matters. So for companies, so if ChatGPT introduces a new product, they can sell it because people know. Whereas a small company might develop an amazing product, like Benevolent might develop an amazing product, but it will then have the battle to get heard, because every other company, so many companies out there are developing AI products. So who's going to win? Who's going to own this space? Is it going to be the big companies, the Googles that have, because of their brand recognition, they can introduce AI products, or is it going to be a lot of little niche players who are developing AI rapidly, almost like a Benevolent, developing a product for a specific product for a specific market and selling it and even though they don't have the brand name, or is it going to be the Googles who own the entire space? A handful of 5 or 6 companies.
I have been hearing that for my entire career. Don't do this because so and so.
No, it's a question.
Yeah. So the question is Google going to win? If you take that approach, there would have been no Anthropic, there would be no OpenAI, there would be no any number of these small companies.
Yeah, but if we fast forward to car companies, say, it may end up that there's, let's say there's 50 car companies in the world. Maybe they'll end up that there's 50. Is it going to be a rationalization, or is it going to be a whole lot of small players who are able to sell software products?
Well, if I think of niche players that have come out of nowhere over the last 12 months, I can name dozens of companies that are now multi-billion-dollar companies.
But if we look at the cycles, like when the internet came out, a lot of service providers, maybe that's the case now, where everyone's introducing products, and there are some notable winners. But in 10 years' time, do you think there'll be a handful of players, or do you think there'll be sort of
no? I think
thousands
there'll be thousands of players. I think just like there are thousands more players now than there were before. There was no Google; it was Yahoo, right?
Yeah,
so,
so these. But so your ability as Benevolent to sell a new product, if you were ChatGPT. Or let's say you're McKinsey, if you're a known name. So someone like McKinsey, which is a company which sells data, they have a big brand name. So it's almost like they have something, even though they might be old world because they've got a lot of people producing that product. They can partner up. That the McKinsey name becomes especially valuable to partner up with companies like Benevolent, because Benevolent doesn't have the brand name McKinsey has. So you might get the big names which have an advantage in the new world.
The benefit of something like McKinsey is their connection, right? Because they're already in the boardroom. So so whether they have 10,000 analysts or they have 5 analysts, right? It's the relationship that they have to kind of deliver the goods into the boardrooms. Whether they have the technical capacity to build this or not, I don't know. They obviously.
So if you were McKinsey, if you were, wouldn't you go and buy a whole lot of these companies and have their product and use your brand name because people?
They may do. They almost certainly will. Actually, you see that actually happening already, where some of the right. I don't want to focus necessarily on consultancies.
Yeah.
The same thing holds true with pharmaceutical companies. It goes through all the way down to what these companies do well, right? So if I think of a pharmaceutical company, what does a pharmaceutical company do well? They do late stage development and market drugs. 80% of all drugs that are on the market started in a biotech, a small biotech.
Okay.
They're not innovators, right? They've got tons of resource, but what do they do well? They're marketing companies.
So we may get to that point with AI products where the big companies are the marketing companies and the small companies out there are developing it.
Yes. Well, that's how it's always been.
Yeah.
Right. And some of those small companies become big companies when they have an exceptional product.
So it's been fascinating to talk to you. I mean, your wealth of knowledge, your depth of knowledge is astounding. I've known for a long time. But if there was one bit of advice you were giving for an entrepreneur, what would it be?
So I'm asked that question quite a lot. I generally have the same answer, which is celebrate your wins. As an entrepreneur, the wins are few and far between, right? And speaking for myself, is once you've closed this contract or you've sold this company or you've done this, you immediately go on to something else without taking a breath. Whatever it is, taking your team out to dinner.
But is that the type of person it takes to need to succeed? The person who is just not going to stop, has got that drive. Maybe the people who don't have that drive, who sit back and relax in the first place.
I think it's right to celebrate the win, right? Because the whole team kind of delivered something, and I would say well, if you were to ask my team, probably the biggest criticism is we've done a good job. Why is Ken pushing me to do this now? Anyway, so that would be my biggest piece of advice, even though I don't follow it myself.
It's amazing your depth of knowledge and your history. But I will say this, in 1992, I had someone come in. I was running a trading desk in a dealing room, and I had I knew neural networks from maths, but I had a neural network expert come in, and I was like, let's apply neural networks to finance in 1992. But we didn't have the data. It was a lousy data and the computing power. But otherwise, I was on it in 1992. But it really is the things that's changed, isn't it? It's like we've got the data, and the ability to store the data. You have the floppy disk, you can't store data. But we've got the ability to store the data and the computing power. But the science has been around a long time, and I wanted to use it in 1992. Go figure.
Yeah. Good stuff. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Been fascinating.